All right, welcome everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 10th of July, 2024, and this is the Cluster API Office Hours meeting. Cluster API is a sub-project of Kubernetes SIGs, and as such, we follow their meeting guidelines, which basically boil down to please treat everyone as you would expect to be treated, or explicitly so, please be kind to each other. And if you'd like to say something, please raise your hand and I will call on you. So at the beginning of our meetings, we like to take a little time to welcome new attendees or new members of the community who might like to introduce themselves. So if that sounds like something that fits your description, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. And the raise hand feature is under the reactions button on your client. All right, I am not seeing any hands going up, so we will move on in 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's look at the open proposal readouts. I don't think we have any open proposals. We do not. So we can move right into discussion topics. Stefan, you're up with the first one about some heads up deprecation. So please take it away.
Yep. Can whoever shares click at the first link, please? So I don't know who's noticing all those issues, but we have a bunch of issues which are flagged with API change, and I just created this umbrella issue and try to categorize it a little bit, mostly by resource. And then down there we have stuff like, oh, all of those are affecting like status fields and conditions, or all of those are about COD columns. And I added Fabrizio like everywhere because I know he's thinking about a lot of this stuff. So on the bright side, I think a lot of this will be solved by what we already have in our heads there. Yeah, so that's mostly just an overview. I also sort of try to add some sort of tags. I mean, that's definitely not complete, but just to basically give a bit of information. So a bunch of stuff I added is, for example, hey, this specific issue, like we have to do a deprecation there. So I have like 3 open of those. I'll get to that in a second. I also have corresponding PRs. Then we have a bunch of those that are already deprecated. And in a lot of those cases, I basically added, hey, this will be removed in V1 Beta 2, or this will be removed in 1.9. And then there's a bunch of other stuff like, I don't know, we have no concrete plans to actually work on this. Yeah, I think that's roughly all. Feel free to take a look. But yeah, that's just like as an introduction to the issue, I would say. And then, yeah, can you go back and open the other 3 issues, basically? I mean, one after another. I just want to explain one after another what it is and why. Okay, so first one, you mentioned this, I think, like a month ago or something. And that's basically like a final heads up before we go ahead. So definitely makes sense if you're interested just to read through this issue and through the PR and all of the stuff to actually understand the whole thing. But on a high level, what you're doing is if you have a cluster class and you have multiple sources where your variables are coming from, for example, one source could be like variables defined in the cluster class, another could be an external runtime extension or multiple external runtime extensions. Basically, it could happen that multiple of them are defining variables that have the same name. Before, let's say the current state on main is basically that if you hit this case, you're saying, oh, there's a variable conflict, and then we require users to do a relatively complicated thing, which is basically they have to specify where this variable was actually defined. So they can say, oh, I want to set this variable, and this variable was coming from inline, or this variable was coming from this external patch, which is, in our opinion, a huge degradation in UX. So what we're going to do instead is basically we are deprecating the definition from field, and we are changing the cluster class controller. So it doesn't just only detect that there's a conflict, but it will also say, oh, the variable reconciliation failed. Please resolve the conflict before moving on. What this also gives us, so one big benefit why I want to do this is it reduces a lot of the complexity we have in our variable defaulting and validation. So we anticipate that it's a lot easier to implement new features there if you don't have to keep that complexity in there. And the other thing is essentially that we are now able to treat our variables as a map, which basically means that variables can be owned by different clients. So we can use proper server-side apply with managed fields into variables. So before this PR, the whole variable array in the cluster was owned by one single client. And if you want to change something, you have to overwrite the whole thing. After this PR, you can basically say, oh, this controller is setting like those 5 variables and those other 3 are set by this one. And you can just manage them properly. That's only possible after this PR, because the requirement to be able to do this is essentially need so if you have an array and you want to make this a map, you need one of the fields, or a combination of fields has to be unique. And basically we didn't have that with that definition from field, because name was sort of unique, but it became not unique when you had different definition froms in that thing. So yeah, so that was like a rough summary. I don't know how easy it was to understand for people who are not like 2 years deep into all of this stuff. Yeah, so heads up, essentially, PR is open, ready, reviewed. We would merge it soon. Let us know if you have concerns or questions. I don't know, or on the issue on the PR. Alrighty, if there are no questions right now.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any hands going up. So.
Then we can go to the second one. Yep, in that case, I think let's just open it. Yeah, definitely the issue makes sense. So basically, yeah, I'll give you some time. Thank you. Okay, so basically we had a few discussions with, oh, Vince is also here. I don't know, Vince, if you want to talk about this one, but I can try to give a summary and then you can add more if I'm misrepresenting. Yeah, but basically we were thinking about machine level checks and how to properly control the behavior. And what we ended up with is basically it would be really nice if the machine health check controller is mostly responsible to figure out if a machine is healthy or not, because I mean, it's called machine health check controller, not necessarily machine remediation controller, but okay. So mostly job of that controller should be to detect if a machine is healthy or not. And then if you want to configure some details on how exactly machines should be remediated, for example, like, oh, don't remediate too many machines at the same time. That should be probably like on the resource that machine actually owns, like the machine set or machine deployment controller or object, or on the KCP object. What we had, or what we have today on a machine health check is basically you can configure these properties, and basically, let's say you set max unhealthy to 2. I hope I'm right, but basically what happens is if the machine health checker, the machine health check controller detects that more than 2 machines are unhealthy, it will just not flag the machines. I don't remember if it's not flagging them as not unhealthy, or if it's not flagging them as they need remediation. But basically, it just won't set the right conditions. Yeah, it's both. Okay.
It's both. Yeah. So like from a behavioral perspective, this is like completely unexpected, right? It's like because I think this was like done in theory like for remediation, but that's not the point of this controller. So like when we started using it, like, it was like a little bit like, oh, surprise! Like the other machines are not even being marked as unhealthy, so they're just hidden.
So the PR that I have open is, the only thing it's doing is marking the flags as deprecated. So that doesn't, yeah. So I think Alberto had a question down there about specific use cases that we might have to think about. What I would do, I mean, I don't have a very strong opinion, but what I would do is basically I would mark the fields as deprecated. Then they are deprecated for, I mean, I would imagine at least the current release on the next one, because let's say there are currently no plans to get V1 beta out V1 beta 2 out until December. So we have some time. People have time to realize this. People have time to come back with the use cases that we might break here or not. That's probably the best signal that we have, putting a deprecation on fields. Yeah.
Sorry, I can't find raise hand because I'm sharing and doing. So I think that for sure the behavior is unexpected. This what is implemented is not a range of about how much we can remediate, but it is basically a circuit breaker for the entire remediation process. and it is surprising. So I'm +1 for this deprecation. I would also like to thank you for all the work on the API changes. The summary umbrella things is really nice to have things categorized. And only one comment about V1 Beta 2. I think that it is most probable that we will get these in the first release of the next year. But yeah, we still have to figure it out and sort out what we want to have in scope.
Vince, you got your hand up?
Yeah, so a couple of comments on this. Like, from a behavioral perspective, like if we do deprecate it, like are we also trying to consider like making it a no op, and so just defaulting them to like same defaults going forward? And the other point I was trying to make that I was going to make is for folks using this with machine set and machine deployments, machine deployment now has an option to limit the amount of remediation, which is ultimately like what this was supposed to do. And that was done in different and was released in 1.7.4.
One question, what did you mean with defaulting while deprecating? I'm not sure what you're suggesting.
So as in remove the functionality and just always say 100%, right? It's like that's because this behavior is a little broken. And so was considering like maybe in the next minor we could make sort of a breaking change, deprecate plus make it almost like you cannot set them, and maybe return a warning if you do set them, and we reset them to what we think it's the right choice.
You mean going one step further than just deprecating the fields, but also basically
Remove the
changing
functionality. Yeah.
Okay. I have the warning thing on my list independent of that. Just
Okay.
as like a generic topic if we should consider across all our deprecated fields. We have more. Just return warnings if they're always set. What is a bit tricky about that is basically a lot of people will get a lot of warnings even if they didn't even set the fields, because a lot of these are actually defaulted. But maybe it's still a good idea. But I'll think about it. Either I open a PR or I open an issue, or let's see what I'm getting to. But I will resurface the warning thing, definitely.
Cool.
Yeah, maybe we can go to the third one, I think. Yeah, so that's also just an additional heads up. I think I brought this up also April, 2 months ago or something. I don't know. So there's a lot of reasoning in there. Maybe just a few words what that actually is the machine deployment revision history. So today, when you create a machine deployment and you just modify it a bunch of times, you will get a few different machine sets. And basically, you can configure on the machine deployment how many of those old, outdated machine sets should be kept around. This is configured with this revision history limit field on a machine deployment, and it defaults to 1. So that means if you have a machine deployment, you do a bunch of upgrades, at some point, all your machines are part of the newest machine set. If you have it at 1, it will have 1 additional machine set, which is the old one. I think most of our users don't really know about this because, I mean, it gets defaulted and you have old machine sets, but they probably don't really know why. But yeah, that's what we have today. What I want to do here is deprecate it in the sense of, basically just get rid of it so that we don't have to worry about the complexity of having this history. Having to keep the history around, and also always have to consider, hey, there could be a bunch of old machine sets that we somehow have to deal with. The deprecation PR contains 3 things. First thing is deprecating the revision history limit field, which is on a machine deployment. So that's one of the tricky edge cases because that one gets defaulted to 1. So if I'm adding a warning for this one, then basically everyone that deploys a machine, that creates or updates the machine deployment will get a warning, even if they don't set it, which is not great. So deprecating that field. Then we have a revision history annotation on the machine deployment. That one basically is just a list of revision numbers. So the machine sets will have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you will get those numbers as an annotation on the machine deployment. That field is currently only written and updated by, I think, the machine deployment controller. But we don't have a single occurrence apart from read and update in our entire code base that reads that annotation. So I'm deprecating that annotation as well. The idea was, I think, eventually to implement it is to use the annotation in a command like Lifecycle rollout history or something, but that was never implemented and merged. And then the third part is I looked at the Lifecycle alpha rollout command. We have a bunch of subcommands there. So we have pause, resume, restart. Those are not affected because they're only using the pause annotation. I mean, they're setting the pause annotation, they're unsetting the pause annotation, and they're setting the rollout after field. So they're totally independent of this feature here. But we have one that is affected, and that is the undo command. The undo command is basically taking a revision number, and then it tries to find the old machine set. Then it copies the spec of the old machine set over the machine deployment. And that's the way you can basically also say, oh yeah, I want to restore like this old machine set. So that command is also deprecated. We basically just deprecating this in favor of please do the proper, please find the proper way to manage your stuff and not try to do rollbacks with kubectl edit and all of that. All of this should be checked in somewhere in Git, or I don't know what people do to manage their machine deployments and stuff. There's a long list of stuff that doesn't work today with that revision management, GitOps and cluster class and a bunch more. So yeah, that's like the overall reason why you want to get rid of it, because it's not very useful. It doesn't work in a lot of ways. It's not even half implemented actually. Yeah. Any questions?
I am not seeing any hands going up, but thank you, Stefan, for putting all that together and kind of giving us a good view of the deprecations that are coming.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. I guess if there's no questions about any of those topics or something about deprecations, I guess we can move on to Chandan, who's got a topic about patch releases. So please, Chandan.
Hey, so we have made a patch release yesterday, that is 1.6.7 and 1.7.4. So 1.6.7 and both releases contain some bug fixes and a couple of feature improvement as well. So please do check it out, the release notes for more detail, and thanks for the contributors.
Cool. And thank you to the release team for keeping up the excellent work there. Does anyone have questions about the patch releases? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands going up. So Fabrizio, you've got the next one with a heads up about some small changes you're evaluating.
Yeah, thank you. We are considering small changes to the 1.8 release calendar. The two changes that we are considering is to anticipate the GA date by 1 day, so the 12th of August instead of the 13th. And the second change is that basically we have to cut the 1.8.1 release, which is 1.8.0 plus official support or validation with Kubernetes 131. We have to make this patch release basically in the 2 days after the Kubernetes GI date, which is the 13th. The reason is because I also sent an email to the to the mailing list and Lubomir for adding the point. And the reason is that Kubernetes Test Infra is planning to start the migration of the Prow control plane some days after the Kubernetes GA release. Then that means that more we delay our patch release is the more we have chance that there will be some disruption due to the Prow migration. So maybe CI job not running or image not being published, etc., etc. So this is why we have to basically try to do our patch release as fast as possible. And yeah, we will follow up. I thank you, the release team. I talked with them before. We are just to finalize detail, but this should be the high-level plan. And Thank you. That's it for me.
All right. Does anyone have questions about these changes that are upcoming? Yeah, Stefan, please.
Yeah, just one quick comment. I would be absolutely in favor of moving the 180 to 12 August. I think that's a good move, just to do it one day before the Kubernetes release. So there's no, I mean, the last time we had like issues like rate limiting, and that's probably easier. I mean, it's less likely that we hit it if we don't do the release on the same day as the Kubernetes release. So I think it's good, and also just a bit of decoupling and de-risking, that everything doesn't happen at the same time.
I see at least one thumbs up coming from chat. All right. Any other questions or comments about that topic? All right. I'm not seeing any hands going up, so we'll move on to Andrea with the topic about cluster classes across namespaces. So please, Andrea.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to know if we have an agreement on how to move forward with it. So from my understanding, we need two different things. So the first thing is to add a class namespace in the cluster topology so that you can actually reference a cluster class from a different namespace. But then the second thing, and those two things must come together, is to restrict which namespace are allowed. Because yeah, I think in any case, we don't want to allow in a multi-tenant scenario the ability to kind of guess a cluster class in another namespace and then read it. And yeah, if this cluster class has hard-coded secrets, that is going to be a problem. Someone proposed to add the allowed namespaces list into the cluster class. And I think Fabrizio had a good comment about if the list is empty, then it should probably have the minimal access, so only the same namespace. But then how would we share it with all clusters? Are we going to implement like a wildcard? And is that where we are stuck with this topic, or is there anything else?
Would anyone like to speak to this? Seems like this topic has been around for quite a while. Yeah, Stefan, please.
If you scroll down to the end of the issue. Yeah, so first up, I think it's mainly about really like the allow part. I think everything else should be relatively straightforward once we get it working and have an end-to-end test for it or something. What would be really interesting, I simply didn't have time to look into it, is if we can use this cap here, essentially that's linked. So I don't know, Daniel, you're here. Maybe you can explain a bit. I literally didn't read it. My assumption is something like maybe we can just use a simple ref and then at some point use this thing to make that ref secure. But that might be totally wrong. And what would be good basically just to read through this, understand it, and then see if we actually want to implement something on our side in case that other cap is actually coming. I don't know if you have to wait for it or not. Or, I mean, it would be definitely good to know that it will get implemented. I don't know if we can actually know that before it is implemented though. Yeah, it would be just a bit, let's say, annoying if this cap basically becomes sort of a standard for this kind of thing, but we still implement our own way to do this. Yeah, it's a bit weird.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, yeah, exactly that's what I was thinking about. At some point, it will become secure. Whatever is the reference to the namespace, class can just add the fields in any way to handle this approach. And then, well, basically, I think that, like, well, the state of the proposal at this point is that they accepted this, merged it, but there are some changes upcoming before introducing this reference grant to the default API groups of Kubernetes. So it would be definitely ideal to have this all together before implementing this change. would say that worst case scenario, cluster API, if it goes the same direction as reference grant, can implement similar resource and treat it as mock implementation of it. But generally speaking, it feels to me that without complicating things, just having ability to specify namespace is good overall. I will refer to maintainers and Andrea if they have more opinions on that. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Lubomir, you had your hand up next.
I just wanted to point out that the reference grant cap had a really high spike of activity at the beginning with multiple companies involved, including Google. But then kind of the initiative died. I haven't seen activity on this at all. If it's really pressing for CAPI to add this feature, you should go with a mechanism that is internal. But there has to be a potential loop to switch to reference grant if it ever gets implemented. It's really a very sketchy design at this point, the reference grant, and I think it will take a while. There are some features in Kubernetes, like I'm talking about caps, that just stay in review for 2 years without activity, and I think reference grant might be one of those. So that's what I wanted to say.
Good heads up. Thank you, Lubomir. Vince, you had your hand up next.
Completely agree with what Lubomir just said. I would also point out, like, if these APIs ever come into core, it would be kind of a bummer that like we wouldn't be able to use it like with older Kubernetes versions. You know, like would have to wait like until like 130 something. So, but regardless, like just go back like to the actual issue at hand here. I personally don't see many issues like of like having like a glob start pattern like in a loud namespace, if at all. And it's kind of like something that we can check for other places that like have done this before. Or we could also go to the option and say like secure your own RBACs, right? Like that could be like a thing too. But I don't see a huge problem to add allowed namespaces. My opinion. Definitely, thank you, Nick.
Yeah, just saying what I wrote plus a bit more. So one thing, we have a bit of runway regarding betas, I think. So we can still do something in beta 1 and beta 2 and, you know, drop it in a year or something. I mean, it gets more complicated with V1, but I think it's okay to do something which might not be the same for the next 10 years. So that's probably fine. And we got pretty close to standardizing the way that identities work in CAPI. I think we just didn't finish the documentation PR and merge it, but I think we have the concept of basically you have some sort of cluster identity, and then we had some structs which were eventually used in, I don't know exactly where, I think Kappa, maybe CapV, and they had stuff like allowed namespaces in there, so maybe it just makes sense to take another look at that and just see if that already works like that or with a few modifications. And at some point, if that cap ever gets implemented, we should probably consider in both places to move to it. If at that point in time it would make sense. So I think it's fine to have it for now, basically the allowed namespace thing consistent. And if you ever have a chance to move to the other thing, then we can also consider moving consistently in both places.
Awesome. Thank you, Vince and Stefan. Vince, did you raise your hand again or was that still up?
Yeah, I was looking at allowed namespaces like in Capital right now. Like, I don't think this allows, maybe I'm wrong, glob style pattern things, which could be, yeah, I mean, like, so like, imagine like you have like tons of namespaces, like adding all of them like kind of defeats the purpose of like shared class almost, right?
What I'm wondering is
Fabrizio.
is it secure if you basically have a namespace pattern match and then someone can just create a namespace to get access to your cluster class? Or I mean, it might be fine in some environments when you basically restrict who can create namespaces. Sorry, Fabrizio,
that
by
is
the
the
way.
most common. Yeah, that's the most common.
Yeah, Fabrizio also has his hand up.
Yeah, I think trying to get to the point where what is blocking. So I think we have to take a definitive final decision. Is security allowing namespace something that we want now or we want to defer? Because it could also be the fact that, yeah, let's do this when we actually have need. I think that there is another, if I'm not, don't remember, if I'm not wrong, there was also something to define about what will be the behavior cluster cattle move in case of cluster class in another namespace, because it's currently not supported. So I think that, yeah, we have to sort out these 2 points. We need security. How do we express it? We need security, yes or no? How do we express it in case of yes? And what we do for cluster cattle move. That's my take on this point, this issue.
Sorry to cut. One open question, like maybe we can just follow up on the issue. Like, do folks want like a subset of namespaces to allow like all other namespaces, or is that something that should be dynamic? Because I was almost thinking, like, to Fabrizio's point, maybe the namespaces you can reference are like a specific flag in CAPI that like only allows a certain set, comma separated, very specific, 2, 3, or 4, whatever. And that's it at the beginning. And then once we want to like add more fine tuning of security and whatnot, we can do that later.
I'll just say something. I think for the beginning, it could be fine to have something on the controller, but I think long term it would be good to be able to define on different cluster classes that they should be able to be used in different namespaces, and that people don't need a controller that continuously updates the allowed namespaces field with a list of namespaces. So something like a selector or whatever the right approach there is would be definitely appreciated.
All right, good discussion. I tried to capture some of that in the notes. Hopefully I came close. And I see Daniil, there's some comments going on in chat. And thank you, Vince. All right, I guess, are there any other questions or comments about this topic? I would say we probably want to continue the discussion on the issue, even though that issue is becoming quite long, but this is complicated necessarily. So, Andrea, please.
Sorry, just to recap, I understand there is no strong no strong opinion against the allowed namespaces. So that if anybody feels like implementing something around that, then that is welcome, and then eventually we can just deprecate it in the future.
Sorry, again, without raising that. I think that we should reach a level of agreement. So we are not V1, but deprecation of a feature is a 1 year and a half long process. So let's try to implement something that makes sense, as minimal as possible, and then expand if we don't have clear requirements. So I think that, yeah, a minimal level of consensus is required. Then of course we can deprecate, but if it's possible to avoid too much iteration, is better. Deprecating a field is a mess.
Yeah, well said, Fabrizio. I think sorry, Stefan, I was just going to cut in line here a little bit. I think given the complexity of the deprecation discussion we just had, and we're not even out of beta yet, like, I love seeing all the attention to this because it's really great for users coming here. But yeah, like the complexity of the project is kind of growing like a snowball down the mountainside or something. Stefan, please.
Yeah, I think we mostly have those discussions because we were staying so long on beta that we're actually trading like beta API versions like GA versions because we don't have another choice. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So what did I want to say? Yeah, I think it could be totally okay to basically open a PR, just modify the class struct, try to come up with a first version of, hey, this is how this allowed namespace thing could look like. And then we just discuss on the PR to get to consensus. Maybe that's a good approach because I think we have consensus that something like allowed namespace is fine. We just don't know 100% already how it exactly should look like. But maybe just looking at structs and discussing a few options could help to move this forward.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I think if anyone's willing to kind of don the armor and make a PR for this, and then we could have the discussion and see what happens. Once we have kind of an implementation to look at, because we are kind of like just oscillating back and forth on different ideas for the implementation. So I'm not sure how much that helps you, Andrea, unless I guess you have some ideas for the PR. But yeah, I guess there it is. All right. Any other comments or questions about this topic? All right. I'm not seeing any hands go up. So Lubomir, you've got the next topic about the KubeCon maintainer track, please.
Yeah, this is a heads up. The maintainer track is open until the 22nd of July. I read what they have in the rules. So TLDR is that if you are a subproject of SQL Lifecycle, you can send your submission for a session, and you can present there for 35 minutes, like a full track. To my knowledge, Fabrizio and Vince already planned something for Capi. So this is more like a heads up for providers, people who are on the call, maybe cluster API operator as well. But you can submit your session. We were first kind of confused whether the SIG leads should do this, but I think it's possible for sub-project maintainers, owners to make a submission. So if you have any questions, open a conversation on Slack, but this is the link you should check, like a form you can complete to make a submission.
Awesome. Thank you for the heads up, Lubomir. Does anyone have questions or comments, or maybe you've got an idea for a maintainer track talk that you'd like to give? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands going up. So we will move into our provider updates. I just see here before we go on, Fabrizio and Vince are thinking about submitting something for Cappy, but not quite done yet. Okay, well, that sounds cool. I guess I'll be curious to see what it is. So provider updates. Richard, you'll have to remind me what CAP MVW is, please.
Yeah, sure. It's a CAP MVM, so the micro VM provider. So it's just a quick heads up. The project sort of died when Weaveworks went under, but now the whole project, Liquid Metal project, has been, I guess, moved away from Weaveworks into community ownership. So the actual micro VM provider is being resurrected. And for anyone that doesn't know, micro VM is just another name for lightweight virtualization, and specifically, in this case, Firecracker and Cloud Hypervisor. So yeah, there's some admin tasks to do, like, the org has changed, so we're changing all the package names and imports and stuff like that. But yeah, if you're interested in hacking on micro VMs, drop by.
Cool. Sounds interesting and exciting to see a provider being resurrected. So cool to see what happens. All right. I guess that leaves us with the feature group updates, which is just me. Today we'll have a meeting of the Carpenter feature group to discuss kind of the status and what's going on. That will happen at the top of the hour after this meeting in the same Zoom channel. So it looks like we've reached the end of our agenda. If anyone has ad hoc topics they would like to bring up, add them now, or I guess hold your peace until next week. So give a few seconds here. All right, going in 3, 2, one. All right. Thank you everyone for coming out, and thank you Fabrizio for assisting with the screen share. We'll see you all online and next week. Thanks.